And here it is, the history of the first quarter. Syracuse, New York's only local sports show in history, unverified. Maybe it wasn't, but hopefully you'll enjoy this episode because if you ever get an opportunity to launch anything, whether it be your own show on the radio platform, maybe your own television show in sports, your own business, maybe something different. How about a podcast? Hopefully this will give you some advice on how to do it, but September 15th, 2014. We've got two guys in their home market in their early 20s hosting Morning Drive in Syracuse. Josh Murray producing the show, but not just producing. You are going to be on the air, fresh out of college, doing
Fresh
the
out.
anchor updates. And one of the things I told you out of the gates, I'm like, I'm not making this a 3-hour monologue. Like, I want you to be a part of the show. I'm bringing you in for segments. Take us through your emotions that you're a few months graduated from college and you're going to Morning Drive in your hometown market and you're going to be on the air.
Well, I'd say the first show, if anybody knows me and knows my personality, I'm very like self-deprecating. So instead of being like excited to be like, here we go, like day one, because the thing is, if anybody doesn't know about the show, I would do what was it called? Like the rundowns or the
So the Sports Center updates you basically do. So
yeah,
like
it would be like
flashes. Yeah.
yeah, it would be every half hour. So the start of your show starts with me. So then instead of me being like, oh, this is awesome, I get to start the show, I'm like, I'm gonna screw this up. Goz is gonna be mad at me. I'm gonna get fired day one, and the first quarter is gonna go into the tank. I'm serious though. That is the thought. Like I remember the morning of, I went into the bathroom. I was like so nervous. It was like I was like Eminem and 8 Mile, like in the bathroom, just like freaking out. So then obviously it's off and running, and it was a great show. But I remember that it's just like the nerves of it going into it. We were so young, but honestly, the chemistry we had on that show was just so awesome. And you obviously could have just been like a Jim Rome where it's just like it's all you for the entire time, the entire 3 hours. But the fact that you brought me in and I tried to add a little comedy when I would come in or a little bit of a different flavor. So I think we played off each other really well. But I just remember that first show, dude. It was like it's just so stupid. It was like 60 seconds of my life, like when you look back on it. But I'm just like terrified the night before. But it and what's funny is you were doing 3 hours and I was terrified to do a minute. Like that goes to show you the difference too of just like I was so like obsessed and so self-deprecating about myself doing the 60-second update that I was like wasn't even like thinking about like, oh, Goz has to do 3 hours of this show.
Yeah,
so I give you a
man,
lot of credit.
But like
talking by yourself too, sorry to cut you off, but talking by yourself for 3 hours sports, like you kind of have to be a little insane to do that.
Right, man. And like to defend you though, like the update, and people don't understand this. I'm telling you, like that 60-second update can be more difficult than doing an hour of sports talk because if you slip up on the update, it's driving you nuts. Like you could hear it like, oh my God, I just slipped up. I just got to power through it. I just got to like, if you slip up talking,
that's a good call.
Right.
Yeah.
But
you definitely have to be kind of like a robot. Like you have to have energy. You have to nail it. Cause then it's like, if you're just talking for a segment, we would have segments all the time. We flub words, whatever. You just keep going. But on that, you're just like, oh my God, I said, and like it sets the tone too to the show. That's how I went into it at least.
And to add to that too, and then two other things to add to that. One, you talked about the updates. Those are timed updates. So top of the hour, there's a clock. How our clock, and the clock basically for a radio term, that means there's actually physically a clock that is counting down the seconds. And when it hit 6:00:00, music would hit, and Josh's update.
You're done.
Hit.
Yeah, you
right.
can't.
So you can't show up late.
Right.
You can't be late. But what Josh forgot, you mentioned a half hour. The bottom of the hour update was manually triggered by me. So let's say, for instance, like Josh is like trying to find a story at like 6:26. In my mind, I have to keep talking until Josh comes into the studio. So like we had this like weird like, okay, whenever Josh comes in, then I'll toss it to him for the update. But if Josh isn't in the studio, I don't know. Like, so there's a little bit of like weirdness going on, not between you and I, but just like timing stuff. Like, hey, it's like, another like timing thing we screwed up on the first show. There's a thing called a bed. So a bed is basically music you hear. I'm so obsessed with the clock being early on. I don't want to screw something up. I'm just playing beds like so long, like 45 seconds. Like I'm telling you, like I would sign off for an hour and you just hear like 45 seconds of music. Because in my mind, I'm like, perfect. I hit the clock. oh man, the music is still going. And I remember Tom Mitchell after like the first or second show was like, one of the segments, and I don't think we're gonna have time for this later on, but like we closed the show with "Show Me Love," which is a song by Robin. And what the segment was, it was a nice idea. Like "Show Me Love" was basically like the best local story going on. We're gonna give a shout out to that person, and we played the Robin Hook "Show Me Love." I played like 90 seconds of it. Like, I was on like a music station. So like he's like, "Hey, the Show Me Love segment, good. Don't play the entire song." Like, okay, that's fair enough. And I think at one point, weren't we doing like weather? Like you and I had to do weather, right?
We got into some. This is the thing. It was so fun, and like honestly, I really like. I look back and I'm just like, I loved being creative, and like we'll get into some segments that didn't work, like the Valentine's Day episode. We'll get into that one, but it was just like some would hit and it would just be awesome, and it was just like I think people liked like us feeding off of each other. Like we would joke around and come up with these wacky segments that it's just like you're just like. It's 6 or 7 in the morning. It's kind of fun to play around too, and just like not just be like, well, the Celtics lost last night, and stuff like that. So I think, so I think that we definitely brought a little creative flavor to it, among other like errors on the first. Are we still getting into the first show?
Yeah. Oh yeah. But like,
talk about the show in general.
But here's the thing. Like, I love that point because it goes. I think it's very good you brought that up because remember, no one's done this before, and that is the biggest freedom we get. Like Tom Mitchell and Shane told us, like, look, we don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to work. We don't know what's not going to work. Go ahead and do whatever you want. And we'll come back and we'll talk about what does and doesn't work. And trust us, we tried a bunch of stuff and we'll get to that. And one other quick thing I want to add. So people are probably wondering, like, you guys have only known each other for 4 months. Like, how do you develop some type of chemistry? Well, look, we're both young guys in radio. We both want it to work. And two, Josh and I kind of have mutual friends. Like we actually played basketball against each other, didn't realize it. Shout out Jailhouse Basketball. There you go. The Jailhouse Basketball 7 minutes into the podcast. Because we played against each other. Salve kids, and you're a Bishop Grimes kid, right? Like we just had mutual friends in Link Court and everything else. So we did
Link Court was like the mutual, I played Link Court baseball with them a couple years and everything. And then we went to Grimes with I went to Grimes with a bunch of Link Court kids. So we definitely had mutual friends, and it kind of blossomed from there.
Rather than us going like show by show, I'm just gonna do one more first show story, and then we're gonna just go through the best stories that people have talked to us about in the last 6 years. I just want to add this about Marty and Shannon. So Marty and Shannon hosted at 95X, and if you're from Central New York, you might even remember them when they hosted at Hot 107.9. I remember as a kid, not to make them feel old, but I remember them from Hot 107.9. What they did that morning was one of the coolest things, still almost like 10 years I got to do radio, like one of the coolest things anyone's ever done for me on that first show. So they're on the air competing against us. If you want to even call 95X in our show competition, we were like a bug. Like we didn't compete with 95X.
Yeah, right.
But during their show, Marty called in. Like Marty went to you. Marty in Syracuse, right?
This, honestly, yeah. I was so nervous. Sorry to cut you off. I was so nervous. I hear his voice. I can kind of like. I'm like, I've heard this voice a lot. I've heard this voice before because I've worked at the radio station. I know his voice. And I was so nervous of like answering the calls, and like I was just like, okay, Marty in Syracuse, here you go, and it ended up being. Go ahead.
Yes. So, and by the way, I don't know how Josh doesn't catch this. 95X is right in front of him. Like he can see
like
Marty and Shannon, like in the window. He's here, like he could see it. Anyways, Marty called in and wanted to talk about the Bills, but he really didn't want to talk about the Bills. Him and Shannon put me on the air and said, "We love you guys. You're gonna crush it. You got a great show. Listen to our guy." So he basically promoted my show on 95X. He could have sat there and did his own show. But Marty and Shannon went out of their way to promote a young guy competing in the same time slot as them on my first show on 95X. So Marty and Shannon, shout out to you guys. That it's a really, really cool thing you did for me. So if you are in Central New York, it shows what those two are. That's really nice that they did that. I never forgot that. So thank you guys for doing that. All right, let's get into some. Go ahead, Josh. And then
I just had one last thing. The thing I remember from the first show also, besides that was the best thing for sure to remember. And then I remember we got like a call from like Florida. Like usually it would be like Central New York. I don't think we ever had another call from outside of New York after that. And it was like the first show was like somebody in Florida like asking about Bayheim or something. I was just like, this is awesome. Like you felt like we're like a nationwide radio show.
And you know what? Josh, that caller, I know who that caller is.
Oh, no, is it a relative?
No, he followed me to Albany. He's a Hobart alum.
Oh, wow.
James Baker is his name. So shout out to James Baker.
Right.
I remember who he was because he followed me all the way from Florida to Albany. Shout out to James
Awesome.
Baker. Clearly, my memory of the show is too much where I remember the names of callers and where they lived.
Mine's too bad. It's like embarrassing. Like I should know way more about everything. But
Well, you gave the perfect word there, a segue. I'm not even going to waste any more time for this story because you know you're going to get tweets and text messages about the story. Let's talk about the late Rollie Massimino.
oh boy.
Josh, take us through what you remember from what is clear. I think, would you agree this is the most talked about thing from the history of the first quarter? Our interview. By the way, I don't know if I spelled his name right. I don't care. Maybe I didn't spell it right, Coach.
R.I.P.
Right,
Rollie Massimino.
All right, what do you remember about the behind the scenes of this interview?
Well, I remember because as a producer, you have to call the person, set it up before, put them on standby, because you can't just be like, hey, you can't do it on air. That doesn't make sense, you know? So like obviously behind the curtain, I have to set it up and then I just let you know when he's ready and you patch him up. And then I remember calling him and he was just like, what? Yeah, I'm ready for this call. Like he was just like doing stuff like that. And I was like, I think I messaged you. I was like, Rollie's ready. He's like angry or so. I was just like, good luck or something. Like I just like, that's the one thing as a producer that I loved when I saw something bad, like somebody that was not into it, or it was too early in the morning for them. I was just like praying for you and like could kind of throw you to the wolves and be like, all right, here he is.
Yeah.
And I just remember him. He had didn't he have like 1-word answers? And then he ripped Boeheim, didn't he?
So, yes. So, you know what? We should probably remind people. So, the late Rollie Massimino is the head coach of the Villanova Wildcats, who had arguably the greatest upset in college basketball history. Villanova beats Georgetown in the national championship. And if you watch the Villanova championship with Chris Jenkins' buzzer beater, they cut to Rollie Massimino in the crowd for that historic moment, too. So, he's this legendary coach for Villanova. So, you're going to notice a theme here for these stories. Josh and I had this idea that, look, let's kind of see. Let's try to we're trying to find our lane basically. Like, okay, like if Mike and Bud and the Manchild are booking this type of guest, let's go with this way. If ESPN Syracuse is kind of a competitor, but they have a morning show, they're doing this, let's try something different. So my thought is, okay, Syracuse is playing Villanova. Let's get Rollie Massimino on to talk about Coach Boeheim and Syracuse. Now, at this point, Coach Massimino is in like his 80s, but he's still coaching. He's coaching, I believe, Longwood, a Division III school in his 80s, which I don't know how many people knew that. He did not stop coaching after Villanova. Now, like Josh just said, I'm calling an 80-year-old man to talk about stuff that happened 30 years ago while he's in season with another team.
And it's like 7 a.m. Also.
It's like,
throw that in there.
Might have been 7, might have been 8. I don't know. He doesn't even know what time it is, right? So hearing like this back to myself, like, okay, would I have done the same thing 5 years later, called an 80-year-old coach to talk about events 30 years later while he was in season? Probably not. And as Josh just said, it was a train wreck. I wish I could play the audio. I don't want to get sued on my podcast so early on.
You still have the audio?
Oh, of course. Of course I have the audio.
You play it for like motivation or something? Like,
just if I want to hear awkward moments, I'll listen to Rollie Massimino respond to my question of, hey, Coach, do you have any great stories competing against you and Coach Boeheim? No.
Oh, man. I think I looked in and you were like sweating at one point. I was just
telling you,
my God.
Like usually interviews should last anywhere, and everybody's different with different formats, but for our show, I believe it was 4 breaks per hour. Probably 8 to 12 minutes. We canceled Coach Massimino after 3.5. Now, here's the thing, Josh. Here's the thing. Now I remember this. We aired that interview at 8:30 because, okay, big name coach, Syracuse Villanova. So my thought process, again with the clock, I'm going to take Coach to like 8:45. We'll break for 4 minutes. We'll close the show. I'm like filling, but like we dump Massimino. I go to break. You come back and we're like, we have 18 minutes left. What are we going to do?
We kind of talked about the.
Yes, we said thanks for Coach not joining us, and the phone lines lit up. They're like, "What the hell was up with Massimino? Why is he hate Goz?" But he was just cranky. 1-word answers. Didn't want to talk about the game. Just Coach speak to me like it was horrible. Best advice: be aware of who you're booking. And
yeah, that's on me.
He was kind of a joke. He was kind of like a jerk, though. To be completely honest, I don't want to talk bad about him because he's passed, but like he wasn't nice to us in any way, shape, or form. Like he clearly did not want to do the interview.
Right. Yeah. No. It was a train wreck from day one. But that was probably the most memorable. Like it's one of those things like we would just bring up the name and we would just start laughing. It just happens though. That stuff happens.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's magic. Like I don't know what your favorite interview was of all time. Mine was Scott Hanson. I mean, he's just a
Yes.
legend. He's just an absolute legend. Scott
Why
Hanson.
is Scott Hanson your favorite interview? Because guess what? Not only is he my favorite interview on the first quarter, he's my favorite interview of any person I've ever interviewed.
Oh,
I wonder
wow.
if it's the same reason.
Right.
Tell the reason
Cool,
why you love
quick.
Scott Hanson.
He just is engaging. Like most people that you have on, you know, it's just like it's like interview, answer. It's not a conversation. It's more of, you know, question and answer. And he would just get on, and maybe it's because also he went to Syracuse. We're obviously a local radio station in Syracuse, but he was just super engaging. I remember he got on, like it was right before the NFL season. He's just like, he was like acting like Santa. Do you remember that? He's like, I got some gifts for you guys, and like it was just awesome. And that's the one thing I remember. That I don't know if you wanted to if you had any other ones that you thought were the best, but I remember just Hanson. You're just like, this guy's amazing, and also has the best job, like the hardest job, but like the best job in broadcasting, to just call touchdowns and meaningful plays from the NFL Sunday every week.
It's amazing you said the Santa Claus thing, because people who are listening to this in Albany remember that phrase, because Scott Hanson remembered it years later, that Goz
did
called
he?
him the Santa Claus of NFL Sunday. Dude, I'm telling you, Albany people know this. Like, it lasted all the way for like till 2020. Last time I spoke to him, like, he remembered that when he was on the phone with you. If I remember this correctly, he was asking about your fantasy team. It's like, Josh, what picks you got, man? Like,
yeah,
he's just chatting it up with you. He gets on the air with me. He's like, Goz, what's up, man? Like, I've never spoken before. He gets on, calls me Goz, like we're boys, like we've known each other forever. Like, but he is really like that. I'm telling you. I'm so glad you brought up Scott Hanson, because he is the best person I've ever interviewed. Genuine dude. The dude you see on Red Zone, he is like that when he's on the phone with you. Awesome, Scott Hanson. Love him.
And to people that like, also like, I was starting out, and to see people like, you see people on TV, or you know, like Rollie Massimino, you see him on the sidelines, and then you have a conversation with him, and you're just like, oh no, you know what I mean? But it's like, you see Scott Hanson on TV every Sunday, and to have him like as authentic as he was so meaningful to us also starting out our careers, that he would like take the time to like have like awesome conversations with us and get personal with us. So
Yes.
it's also those things too. It's just like people that give back a little bit when they don't have to. Like, he could have mailed in an interview. Like, why? He's Scott Hanson, you know?
Yes. Do you remember this one? The Torry
Torry
Holt.
Holt, yes.
All right.
That personally is my favorite. That is my well, no. I know I just said Scott Hanson, but Scott Hanson was the best interview. This is my personal favorite because it was also a train wreck, but for like Rollie Massimino was a train wreck because he didn't engage. Torry Holt was like taking his kids to school, right? And then the GPS just kept being like, turn left, just like was going, and it was just like, didn't you have to end the interview with him? He was just like, I'm sorry, I'm taking my kids to work.
So what happened was, Torry Holt, for those who don't know Torry Holt, torched Syracuse in the late 90s. He's in the College Football Hall of Fame. He should be in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. Again, taping this in February 2021. Hopefully, if 2 or 3 years from now you're listening to this, Torry Holt's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. So he's a beast. NC State football is playing Syracuse. And again, Josh and I say mindset. Let's get somebody who maybe another show won't have. Let's get the best NC State football player of all time, Torry Holt, comes on the show with us. So we're doing it live. And like Josh said, he's going to the NC State campus with his kids. Now, I think he's like going for a visit. Maybe he's just, it's, hey, come see the campus because we're in town for the event, whatever. He is going to the NC State campus for school.
Forgot his directions around town since the time he played there.
So he's got his GPS on his phone live on the air, and he's just isn't missing a beat. Yeah, NC State's wide receiver in 500 feet, turn left. The Cuse quarterbacks, they got to make it. In 200 feet, turn left. The whole interview, the GPS is going up. Now, what do I do, though? I'm talking to a college football Hall of Famer, a NFL legend. I'm a young kid on the air. Should I have had the stones to say, hey, Torry, turn down your GPS. You're talking to Goz on the first quarter. Like, I don't know.
You can't.
What should I have done?
No. I mean, you had to let it, honestly, you just had to let it ride. I think it played out the funny. I mean, if you're a listener too, like you definitely were laughing along with us, like, and it kind of keeps you engaged. Like, is he gonna keep the GPS on this whole interview? Like, is he aware? Like, you know what I mean? Like,
oh, it was so much fun. All right, this one you say you don't remember because we talked a little bit before we reconnected here. Do you remember the Dan Wolken fight on the air between him and I? Okay,
I do not.
so for those of you who are not familiar with Dan Wolken works for the USA Today. Now, Dan Wolken has become much more popular over the last 12 months, so more so 2020. Wolken became popular last year because he was the guy who first said they should cancel March Madness. Now, he's been renamed by a lot of other people Dan Woken because let's say a lot of his takes from the USA Today have provoked controversy. He has become one of the guys who gets just tortured and ripped apart on social media for his takes. Now, every time a coach might get fired, just Google Dan Wolken fired and a ton of articles will pop up. Like, is he going for clicks? What's he going for? I don't know. So here's what I decided to do. Dan Wolken, I book him for the show. Now, when Josh and I are on the air, it's an interesting time in Syracuse history because this is when Syracuse basketball goes on probation. Syracuse basketball is given NCAA violations. They're not going to the NCAA tournament over the Fab Melo situation. So it's an amazing time to be on the air in Central New York because controversy is happening. I did a hit with like 24/7 Sports, which I don't even know if that exists anymore. So like we're getting some pub here, like of what's going on. So Wolken writes a story for the USA Today that Jim Boeheim should be fired. And I decided to book him on the show. Now, Josh knows this. I'm a huge pro wrestling fan. I will fully admit that like a white hot baby face, aka the good guy, I knew if I booked Wolken and I defended Syracuse, I might become more of an endearing person to the Syracuse audience. I will fully admit that. And if people want to criticize that for wanting to have people like my show or like me, go ahead, throw the criticism at me. But I knew if I put Wolken on the air and he's going to say they should fire Boeheim in Syracuse, he's got to have some stones. Josh, I will fully admit I thought he was going to say no. I thought he knew he was going into the Lions' den and was going to say, I'm not doing that interview. That's just stupid. Why would I go to Syracuse and say Jim Boeheim's going to get fired? But sure enough,
I remember it now.
He does the interview. Here's the opening question. I thought I handled this well. Maybe people will disagree. I said, Dan, you just wrote an article for the USA Today. You noted in your article that you believe legendary basketball coach Jim Boeheim should be fired. Why do you think that? His response, well, did you read the NCAA report? I'm yeah, Dan, I did read the NCAA report. So then, look, it's a back and forth after that. It's more of like, do you remember this? Do you remember that? So, like, Wolken is trying to argue what's in the report, but what he wasn't ready for is that I'm hosting in Syracuse. Of course I read the report. And every time he came at me about something in the report, I came right back at him. So you can imagine what happens to the phone lines on a morning drive show in the middle of a controversy involving Syracuse basketball and basketball season, and you've got a guy on the air who wants Boeheim fired. Josh, do you remember how fast those phone lines lit up?
Yeah.
With the legends like Pat and Syracuse and Dro and Clay and Vito and Steve and like that. We took calls for the rest of the show because they all hated Wolken.
Yeah. And that was the thing too, which I liked, like was fun about local radio, is just like some days it's fun, some days it's not. But the engagement of that, like anything Boeheim related, good or bad, is gonna light up the phone lines. Like if you defend him and somebody, like you said, have him on, phones are gonna light up wanting to torch this guy. If you come on and say, you know, I think Boeheim could have done this last night in the game, it's just, he's got the following is insane. So those were definitely fun too, because I remember the phone lines lighting up. I remember you guys going at it. And now that you brought that one up, that was definitely up there. It was probably a top fiver for sure.
All right, so we're bringing up one of the favorite moments. Let's get to, without question, the worst moment. Not Rollie Massimino. People always think it's Rollie Massimino. It is this Valentine's Day segment.
I'm cringing. Right. I'm just cringing thinking about it.
What do you remember about this Valentine's Day segment you and I did on the air?
I remember, honestly, we would have these segments, and most of them were, we would think that they were pretty good. Whether the audience thought they were good or not, who knows? But you're in the segment. Obviously, it's like, think about if you're on TV and you're doing a bit or something. You're committing to the bit, regardless if it's good or bad through the whole thing. This was the one segment. I looked at you. I think it was about like halfway through the segment, and I think I just like, because nobody could see us. Obviously, it was just audio. We're just on the radio, and I just like I was shaking my head. I'm like, this is. I didn't say anything, but I'm just like, this is awful. I want out of this so fast. Like it was so cringe. I don't know if you want to go through it.
Yes. But. So okay. So for people who are establishing radio shows, podcasts, a bit is what it's called sometimes. This was definitely a bit in comparison to what's called a benchmark. So a benchmark is something you could hear throughout a show either daily or weekly. So Albany listeners are probably going to find out some secrets here they never knew before. But when I came to Albany, there's a segment from Levack and Goz called Monday Mirages. That started on this show. Josh and I every Monday did a show segment called Monday Mirages. It came right from the first quarter. So Levack and Goz Monday Mirages, that's not original. That's from this show. We did a segment called DVR Recap. So at 6:30 in the morning, Josh and I would be on the air recapping the West Coast events for people who were up who missed it. We played a bet underneath that. It's the artist is named The Alchemist. I would tell you the song, but you can look it up. Like you'll know the beat. The beat we used for that is the same beat that we used for Wednesday Y for Levack and Goz, the same exact song. So again, Albany listeners, you're finding out a lot of stuff from Levack and Goz came from this show. We did a segment called Defend Your Tweet. Now, I never used Defend Your Tweet again because people got so worked up about digging for teenager tweets that they wanted to shame everybody. I had to basically get rid of the segment. But there's a mix between that segment and another stupid thing I called the Internet Paste Eater of the Day, which basically became socially awkward media, also with a little bit of Damon Amendola's Market Demo Friday. So there's a combination of those three segments became socially awkward media. And then we did a thing called the Sunday 7 on Fridays, which was football picks, became fantasy versus reality. Now, okay, Levack's my co-host. Credit to Levack. It's not like I got all these ideas and I just said, all right, take all my ideas. We worked and fine-tuned some stuff. Like what Josh and I did originally, I took with Levack and said, okay, let's change this. Let's change that. The Sunday 7 in fantasy versus reality is very not close. But what we're learning here is there's benchmarks and there's stuff. But my mind has always been like that. Like if you're going to do a benchmark, people will remember a benchmark because it's unique to your show. And my thought process is this. Okay, anytime there's a holiday, let's do a holiday themed something. I think one time we might have done Thanksgiving, the biggest turkeys of the year. Not very original, I'll admit that. I think for a December show, we probably did the top 5 moments, stuff like that.
Something, yeah. I mean,
so
we had cliche stuff. It's not like we had. I'm not going to sit here and act like we had the most groundbreaking stuff.
Radio.
We had some creative stuff. Some was just
classic.
Yeah.
So what I decided to do for Josh. So on Valentine's Day, I wrote love letters. So the idea behind the bit was that Josh would read a love letter to me and I had to guess the athlete. So imagine poor Josh reading these love letters.
I don't think I did it in advance. I Because sometimes sometimes in radio you'd set up bits depending on if we had our normal bits, we wouldn't rehearse them just because not rehearse them, but you don't want to sound stupid on air, so you kind of want to know what's going on through the whole segment. I don't know why. I just was like, no, this will be fine. I think this will be all right. So I'm reading them for the first time on air. Yeah. Just love letter to Goz from some athlete from right. LeBron. He thinks LeBron James would write him.
Right. So this basically it'd be like, hey, dear Goz, I'm a 6'8" superstar in the NBA, and I think I can lead my team to the NBA championship. But you said earlier this week I was overrated and can't play defense. Who am I, guys? So it's a horrible version of the dating game, but over the air with it. It is horrendous. And I'm telling you,
you still have clips of all this?
Hell no. I did not save that just in case someone ever heard it again. I didn't want to have you and I.
You still have Rollie Massimino, so.
I know I do have Rollie Massimino. All right, I have 2 more for you here, and then we're gonna figure out exactly why I left Syracuse and what happened with the rest of us. Do you remember when I brought a beer pong table into the studio?
I do. I loved that. That was great. We needed the studio was so tiny. I always wanted to I wish we had a bigger studio because we could have had that in there and just played all the time on breaks or something.
So I brought a beer pong table into the studio, like Josh said earlier. We'd meet each other up at bars and stuff. But the reason I brought the beer pong table in is I tried something at the end called the Table of Truth. I think it was called the Table of Confessions or something. So the idea was that if you made the cup, I had to tell a story I'd never told before on the air, of my life, Kevin Brown was the only one who played, who's the broadcaster for the Orioles now. But if you missed, you had to tell a story. And Kevin had this like amazing story he told. And then he made his
great.
come. And I'm like, I can name all the Backstreet Boys, NSYNC, O-Town, and I think like One Direction may have just been started at that point. Like all the members. He's like, that's not embarrassing. Like, that's all Kevin, that's like 5 boy bands. What do you mean it's not embarrassing? He's like, I can do it too. So it was a bomb segment, but the hype for that was great because like Manchild and Lindsley were getting ticked. They're like, why is there a beer pong table in the studio? We're basically broadcasting from a closet. We have no room.
It pretty much was a closet. Yeah.
We have no room for a table in the studio. So again, as you can find out, Josh and I are trying everything. Like we're trying to do creative, different stuff to see what sticks and what doesn't, what works, what doesn't, everything else. Last one
I wish they had Instagram Live back then because we could have went live with those beer pong segments.
Oh,
and got a little traction.
I'm telling you, that is a great point because look, we're doing this in 2014, 2015. At this point, a lot of people don't understand Facebook Live, Instagram Live, Twitter, like live videos, YouTube. We're in this.
I don't think it was a thing. It wasn't a thing, right?
Like
it's like 3 years ago.
It's a thing, but what's the problem is twofold. One, at this point, people are struggling to understand what monetizing of that means. Like they don't want to get out the content unless they're making money off of it. And because we're working for a radio station, if we're going to do that, to Score 1260 wants to see a profit from it, and rightfully so. Like they're a business. If you're going to create content for a business, let's see what the value of that is. Do you remember when we got featured nationally on the DA show?
Remind me. I barely remember that
one. We had Damon Amendola on, and Damon Amendola is one of the people I look up to in radio as well. Give a shout out to his show. Yeah, like I think if you listen to his show, there's a good combination between the history of the first quarter and Levack and Goz and other shows I've done. Like Mraz is sometimes when he's more focused on sports, it's a better combination. They do goofy stuff and everything else. But what happens is DA did this thing called the 12 DAs of Christmas, where he was our lead-in. So DA was on from 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. And then the first quarter, Josh and I were on from 6 to 9. DA, I would hear his show driving in. So he'd do these segments where basically the 12 best moments of the year. So when DA came on with us, I thought we were going to talk Syracuse. I'm like, you know what? I just want to promote his show. I'll talk Syracuse at the end, but I want to say how great his 12 DAs of Christmas are because they were great. So what he did was he took my interview asking about one of the clips and he replayed it on his national show. So he took our show and we're off to affiliates across the country. You could only imagine how excited we were that like, oh my God, like we're doing the show and we're less than 6 months into this and they're featuring us on a national radio show, our interview. So Damon Amendola, shout out to him, man. It was really cool that we're driving into work and we hear ourselves on CBS Sports Radio.
That's true.
Next day, right? It's insane, man. So shout out to DA and Mraz for doing that. So
do you think that was like your favorite? What do you think your favorite moment of the first quarter was? Like, do you think that was it? I mean, being played on a national broadcast is kind of tough to beat.
It's pretty awesome. I think my favorite moment, it's going to sound very cliche, but it's true. It's because it's the first and the last moments. So the first time you get to crack a microphone on your own show in your dream job in Syracuse, it's like, oh my God, like if I get canceled tomorrow, I did it. Like, you know,
dude,
like
that is way too cliche.
Right? But it's true. Look, it's true. It's that, and then it's the last show. Because the last show, I will fully admit, like I get to go to
Albany. Want to get into this now?
Let's do this now. We'll kind of talk about why it all ended. Because the last show, I signed off every episode. I said, I'll talk to you guys later. And I said, this is it. Like I signed off. I was crying. You were crying because I'm like, I don't want to go. Like this is the job I wanted.
That was a tough segment to get through. I remember.
Yeah, man. Like I even said on the air, like I want to leave my dream job. Like I love the Score 1260. I have to go. This is all I've ever wanted to do.
Yeah.
But I can't do it anymore. And like I think you told me after, like, guys, that's the realest. Like that's the realest stuff I've ever heard. And I like that's been the biggest compliment to this podcast is like I don't have to have chains and like bosses to tell me who to like. That's what I think people respond to the most is when people are real and authentic, like we're always trying to be.
And I think that was part of why, like, I'm not saying we had this huge following at all, but like we had this like following for people, my friends, your friends, local listeners in Central New York that were like, I think that they liked how authentic we were, good or bad. As we went into it, there were some bad segments that crashed, and there were some amazing segments. And I think that you just didn't know what you were going to get day in and day out with us, which I thought was was awesome. And, it was incredible.
So here's what happens. Let me take you through the end of the first quarter and what actually goes down. So like we had mentioned in episode 1, I'm working as a part of the sales team. And not to dive too deep into the setup of Cumulus Media Syracuse and if it's changed or not, but when they offered me my full-time contract, the pay scale, because I'm now like a full-time employee with benefits, is by far and away the most money I've ever made in my entire life. Like, again, dream job, home market, living with your parents, talking Syracuse sports, and now they've offered you more money than you ever made in your entire life. Again, 24. I don't know how many offers you've ever gotten to, it's not a big brag that you make a ton of money, but like you're really not. But in your mind, like you've had part-time jobs. This is a real deal. But how my contract was structured was that for 6 months, I would be making more money than I've ever made in my entire life. And by like month number 7, I would have to reset. So again, not to dive too deep into it, but if you work in a sales position, you kind of understand the incentives of selling more. I'll just leave it at that. Like you could benefit more from selling more. I'll just leave it at that. Hopefully people understand what that clue is. So look, I'm working with Shane. I'm working with Jamie Lawler, who is still there, by the way. So they're trying to get me to sell. And okay, like, all right, like I get it. If I sell, I make money. It totally makes sense. But here are 2 things I think I need to remind people. I came from a sales job where I was selling Under Armour and Adidas. And what I could see was that if I gave you a hoodie with a logo on it, I would see somebody's reaction be like, yes, like this is sick. I'm a sports fan. You're a sports fan. Like if you know somebody's got a sick uniform or cool gear or anything else, you can see people's reactions. Right. What I struggled with early on is that people were investing in this. And by investing, it was like, hey, you're going to have to buy for 6 months or you're going to have to buy for a year. And at that time, we'll find out exactly what happens. I will fully admit at 24 and 25 years old, I didn't have enough confidence in myself to go to a business and say, hey, trust me, this is going to work because, and that's where I stopped because I didn't have a because yet. I think I can help your business make money because I've got ratings. No. I'm popular in the market. No. I've built a following. No. Like all the stuff that would help a business benefit, I just flat out hadn't done it yet. Like it's really hard to sell any type of media, like radio especially, but it was even double for me. This is not an excuse. This is just real. Like never done the job before. Didn't have confidence in myself that I could sell my own show. And because the score 1260 isn't a rating, it's not exactly a priority for other salespeople. And the fourth one is, look, if you were on a sales team and one of your fellow coworkers had the opportunity to sell their own show, how often would you sell their show? Like Goz has got that covered. Like that's a you thing, man. You go do your thing on your side and have that happen. So look, these are some of the regrets I have about it. Jamie Lawler, who was my sales manager, if I have one regret of any job I've ever taken, it's how I treated Jamie. And not so much about like I think people know me well enough that I'm not like a person who calls people names or insults people. Like I just don't do that. But what I mean by how I treated Jamie is that Jamie went out of her way to help me as often as she could. Like, what would you do if you were in Jamie's spot? You've got a salesperson who is far more concerned about his show. And you know why? I've explained it 5 times. But he's making good money. He doesn't really have an incentive to sell because he's fine. Like he's good. What are you going to do to push him? I remember this one meeting. And again, if I see Jamie, I will beg for her forgiveness because I was just an idiot for some of the stuff I did. We went to your high school, Josh.
Grimes?
We went to Grimes. We went to Bishop Grimes High School, and people know this
just
is
you two? Or?
Just me and Jamie. We went to a private school in Syracuse, Josh's alma mater. So the idea was that we were going to pitch Bishop Grimes as the game of the week. So we were going to have the Bishop Grimes coach on, and because they're a private school, you'll help endorse, something on the score 1260. You'll do stuff for 93Q, all this stuff. I show up to the meeting, dude. I don't have anything to write with. Like, not a pen, not a pencil. Like, I got no pay. Like, dude, I just showed up with Jamie should have strangled me in the car at that moment because she went out of her way to get the sales call. She set up the meeting, and I just showed up like, not cocky, not arrogant. No, none of those things. But it's like,
it was one of those things. I just think that, like, I think also, like, you shouldn't be too hard on yourself because it's one of those things that you painted where it was like, painted the picture earlier. And you said it multiple times. Like, you just wanted your show. You didn't want to sell. you know? So like and it's tough because also you were super young when you got the show. So your priorities, and you said living at home, making good money, there's no incentive for you. And you're not seeing that how it affects her from what she's doing, you know?
Right. And that's the thing is like Jamie is doing everything she can to help me become a better salesperson. And she has the mindset, and Shane, my boss, had that mindset is like, look, if you can sell your show, you can be here as long as you want. Like you can do this and you can have it happen. But honestly, and I internally struggle with this so much during this time. I'm like, I can't look somebody in the face right now and tell them, if you spend on my show, you're going to see a benefit. Now, there's a big reason to that because like you just said, I didn't know things like how does an endorsement work? How does you going to a business help the show? What can I just didn't know. Nobody sat down and taught me like, hey, as a radio host, here's what you should do, X, Y, and Z. And this is the biggest thing that changed. And this is hopefully my biggest piece of advice I can offer from what changed in my career from Syracuse to Albany is that when I got to work in Albany for 104.5, the team I was hosting Afternoon Drive, I finally got to learn. Like I worked, and I don't want to say the businesses yet because they're probably going to sponsor soon to be podcasts. I hope because I built great partnerships with these people. I figured it out. Hey, if you're endorsing a product, get to know the people, go to
Right.
the business, build a relationship, talk about them. Don't just say their phone number and where they're located and be done. Talk about the people that are there. Talk about the experience you had. Don't make it sound like a 30-second commercial. Really get to learn about the businesses. And then it's over time. Like, what did you do today? What did you do the next month? How did you incorporate them in your lives? I didn't know any of that stuff, but I learned that in Albany. And that's what's been the coolest part about this format now is that I know what I'm doing now. Like 7 years later, I can tell a client who's going to hopefully partner, if you're listening to this for the first time, with us and say, hey, here's what you should do. Here's what you shouldn't do. One of the things that always would frustrate me about radio sales and television sales was that you have a small period of a window. So in other words, like, okay, let's say you buy 6 months of advertising and you're buying in February and you're off the air in September. Well, you're off the air. Like if I'm watching a football game and you're not on the air, you're not on the air. But in podcasts, I'm going to have this live forever. Like if you partner with me and this podcast you're listening to now is taped in 2021, hopefully you hear it in 2023. It's the same thing. Like that's what I love. There's a base for this here. And I know what to do now. I know how to talk to people. I know what can happen when you do this the right way and people follow you. I feel like I just had the scene in Tommy Boy where Tommy sold the wings to Helen. Yeah, you look like a Helen. I feel like I just had a flashback of Tommy Callahan talking about sales. So I'll get off the sales thing, but like that's a
No,
true
but
honest answer.
it's so and it's so tough, dude. Like I did not, and honestly, I saw the struggles that you went through. Like internally, you would talk to me on a daily basis, and I would see like the pressure that people would put on you, and everything that went into just like how national radio corporations work, and it scared me, dude. Like I was just like, I never asked to sell or anything when I was there, just because I saw all the hardships that you went through to try to make it work. And it's just like, yeah, this is,
Yeah, man.
I gotta get out of this business because this is, and I love sports talk radio and everything, but just as like a radio station, it was so tough, man, day to day.
Yeah, man. And here's the thing, like for perspective, Josh would see me every day. I would get up at 4:30 in the morning. I'd get to the radio station at 5. I would have like, you know how people joke around about news anchors? I legit would have a dress shirt, tie, and gym shorts on hosting the show every single day.
Yeah.
Because I would go to the bathroom at the end of the show, put my dress pants on, and get ready to go to the sales. And then I would try to sell, try to find out ways to do it, try to get people to buy in, even though nobody knew what the hell the show was. And we're trying to figure out our ways. Like, look, trying to find a niche is an important thing. Like Bud and the Manchild have been around for 15, 20 years. Bud's a columnist who's been writing about sports longer than been on Earth. Manchild's one of the smartest people who's ever done this.
Right.
Mike Lindsley knew the sales thing. The ESPN Syracuse station had, I think Stephen Fonte was a local news anchor at that time. I think Brent Axe had been back, or it might have been Chris McBest and
Two
Stephen
established guys, and also you have the games on.
Yes,
You have
right.
Syracuse games on.
So like, look, we're trying to find our footing of like trying to find out who we are. And that's the hardest part too, that, you know, that's the biggest difference 7 years later. I didn't really know who I was as a host. I didn't know what people responded to, but now they can show off my personality, be more of me. Like I get it. I learned, I figured it out. I can go to a business now if you promote on this podcast and be like, hey, here's what we can do. And here's why, and here's what you shouldn't do. And here's why, which is a big thing. So basically what happens is this, I get to February and I'm kind of seeing like I'm swimming. Like I'm getting up at 4:30 in the morning. I'm not going to bed till super late because I'm prepping for the show. I'm just constantly working. And it sucks when you're working hard and people don't think you're working hard because you're not showing the results. Like you
Right.
can call 100 businesses and get no results and be like, well, you didn't work hard. It was like, yeah, I did. Like, I just can't finish it, man. I can't put this through. So at this point, as you've heard, I just want to be a sports radio host. I want to be a sports broadcaster. I want to make this happen. So I just start looking at other jobs. I'm like, you know what? I don't doubt my ability on the air. That's, again, not to be arrogant or cocky or anything. Like, that's not how it is. Like, I know the stuff's good. I know if I get an open microphone, I can do this. So I just start sending my stuff out, and I go to this website called STAA, which is, I think it's called Sports Talent Agents Association. It's STAA broadcast. You Google that, you'll see it. So I see an opening in Albany, New York for 104.5 The Team, and it's for a producer role. Now, as you probably have already heard, I worked my way up from producer to host, and I have enough confidence in myself where I'm like, you know what? If I take this part-time job in Albany, I think I can do it again. Now, Albany is an ESPN radio affiliate. I have cousins in Albany. It's a bigger market. It's 2 hours east of where I grew up. And maybe these people won't have me sell. And if I can work my way up like I did before, I will take the risk. I got some money saved up. I got some tape saved up. I think I can do this. So I email my resume and everything over to Armin Williams, who's the brand manager at that point. And he calls me and says, yeah, we're very interested. We go out to Buffalo Wild Wings. And now,
Classic.
yeah, so they interview me there and then they call me again. But one of the things that's interesting about this, there's two things, because people are probably wondering about, like, how are you able to do this during your contract? One, I didn't tell anybody. And Shane's like, look, Shane's being a boss. Shane's like, Goz, you got to pick up your sales. You got to get your stuff going. And I'm like, now I'm getting to a point where I'm like, I'm interviewing with Albany and I'm like, okay, like, I think this Albany thing's going to happen. My sales aren't going to pick up because I'm going to go to Albany. Like, I can feel this coming, that I'm the guy. And my contract doesn't work because Albany's out of Syracuse. Like, I'm not working within the same area, if that makes sense. I think some people understand what that means, but it's like I'm leaving the market. So a lot of my contract stuff is not going to hold up. So basically, I went to Shane one day. I'm like, look, I got to call in the parking lot of the Score 1260 that we can bring you into Albany. It's a part-time gig. It's a producer job. But talking to Armin, like, he told me, like, look, there's a chance one day you can work your way up and you could be an afternoon host here, or you could be a brand manager, program director if you do it. And I knew it. Like, I'm going to take this risk. I'm going to leave my dream job because there's going to be one day where I get an opportunity to do this job as a non-salesperson. I can show people that I can do it. So I took the job offer in the parking lot of Cumulus Media. Shane asked me about how my sales are going to do that month. I'm like, Shane, I got to be honest with you, man. Like, I'm going to Albany. I got an offer today. I don't even know if he asked me if it was part-time or full-time. I'm like, I'm going. And he had the biggest smile on his face. He goes, I'm so proud of you. He's like, you did it. Like, I know I wanted you to stay here. I know this is your dream job. I know you want to do sales, but he gave me another piece of advice. He goes, I want you to fail 3 times before you're 26. I said, what do you mean? He goes, look, there's going to be times early in your life where you're going to give something a chance and you might fail. But when you're 26, you don't usually have a wife, a kid, a house. Go give it a shot and see what happens. So I'm moving to Albany. I'm like, you know what? I got a full-time job here hosting, but I'm going to take a step back and see what happens. And for those of you who are listening to this podcast, you kind of knew what happened. I did it. I worked my way up from producer to afternoon drive host to full-time to brand manager and everything else. So I took the risk, and that's why I left. I wasn't good at sales when I was 24 or 25. It was different than the sales job I had up north. But if I had known things that I know now, it could have been a different story. So I didn't leave because of Josh Murray. I'll say that.
I was
don't know
going
how
to say,
knew,
it goes back. Actually, I call back to the earlier thing I said about Game of Thrones. Then you actually did the Red Wedding to me when you took the Red Wedding episode, and you killed the first quarter, and then that was that. And I couldn't handle living in Syracuse without the first quarter on, so I packed up and I moved to the West Coast, and that's my story.
That's not what happened. No. What happened was the first quarter goes down on April 10th, 2015. Syracuse, the Score 1260 does not replace the morning show. So there is no morning show after us. It's been 6 years.
Correct.
Hopefully one day a morning show will come back and we'll see what happens. Mike Lindsay, I believe, leaves in November of 2017. So right now on the score 1260, it's just Bud and the Man-Child. Boyd Green, Paul Eston Jr. had a little bit of a run there in the afternoons. I think COVID-19 may have affected his future. I don't know what the future is for that drive time show at 3 to 6. I know it went to 4 to 6 at one point. I honestly don't know, but I know I say COVID just because that's when that was going on and that show was taken off the air. So Josh, when I go off there, you're still employed at the score. You move in an interesting role, though. People may not know this behind the scenes in Syracuse radio. Bud Poliquin at that point takes like half the year off. And you go for like 6 months with Manchild during that show of, is my timeline right? Is that August?
Yeah, no,
of
it was
2015?
about that. Yeah, I don't remember the exact timeline, but obviously, as you were mentioning, like your big breaks, and that was kind of like an awesome thing because me and Manchild Lurch, we have a very good rapport. So I would go in usually for the first segment when I was a producer, and then Bud, for whatever his reasons, and he wasn't able to go to the show for like 6 months. So I was just hosting with Lurch for 6 months, me and him, and it was great for my career at the time, and I owe him a lot for that time.
So some people wonder these two questions. One, did you have any interest? Because when I was leaving, did you ever go to Tom Mitchell or Shane and be like, I want to host now? And two, why did you eventually leave the score 1260?
The first one is I did not say I wanted a show because I knew that they would have to have me sell, and also I was not ready, to be honest. Like I remember one time you had to have a meeting or something, and I had to sub in one day or for a segment, and it was
Tom
just like
Wormy.
awful.
Tom Wormy, by the way, the
And I
broadcaster.
interviewed.
Yes. If people remember that Tom Wormy does a bunch of broadcasts for the ACC network. I just couldn't do it. And by the way, we should have just taped it. Like, why didn't I just have Wormy go the day before? We taped those two segments and like, I wouldn't have had to have you fill.
Well, I think you were doing me a solid also to be like, hey, do you want to fill in, blah, blah, blah. And I was just like, I was not confident. Like, I'm good, like this banter, but like just hosting by myself, train wreck every time I would do it. So that was kind of like when I knew also just like, maybe this radio gig thing isn't for you. And then I would do it with Lurch's show, but I always wanted to move to the West Coast. I'm not going to dive too much into my stuff, but my sister used to live out here, so I always wanted to go out here, and I gave the radio gig a little bit. And then when I was hosting with Lurch, sometimes he would be out, and that was another thing. I would host with Bud, and you were talking about your moments, like Jamie, like when you had that meeting with Jamie. Unfortunately, my moment, which is like the most cringe of my entire life, is I think the first time I hosted with Bud, and I was not a confident, I would say host at the time. I was confident. I was a very confident producer. I was not a confident host at the time. And I remember, here's this kid. I was talking to him about it. I told him that I was like nervous to host. Blah blah blah. He showed up 15 minutes late to the start of the radio show. So that was a one way to like. I just had to deal with that off the top. I bet there was like 5 minutes of like dead air. It was like, that's the unfortunate thing. My worst moment was also broadcasted on air. If you were in the local central New York area and tuned in, you were just like, what is this kid doing? So that was kind of the moment where I knew. I was like, all right, radio isn't for me. So packed up to the West Coast, and I've been out here for almost 6 years now. It's pretty crazy. Pretty much after I left the score, I didn't leave the score, or what I was going to say. I was, it wasn't like the score, me leaving had anything to do with it. I just always knew that I wanted to come to the West Coast, and I did, and worked in production for about 4 or 5 years, had some cool stuff. Worked on some cool shoots, got to go to the Nike headquarters. So that was probably the biggest high of that, was shooting a commercial there. And then, after that, the place that I was at last closed down, and then I ended up a account manager at a pharmacy or a pharmacy place, Jarrow Formulas, and that's been the best place during the pandemic. So I'm happy that it's funny how things work out, dude. Like if I was still working in the production, like I would have been done, or if I was in radio, I would have, like if I was in Central New York doing the score, I would have been done like 1,000%. So it's funny how things work out, for the best ways.
By done, you mean you would have been burned out by the media, or you think you wouldn't have been employed because of how media has changed, or a combination of both?
I think I wouldn't have been employed. I just think that, people have to cut their losses, and I was very expendable at the score. I would say that.
I think, Josh, as you mentioned earlier, you are very self-deprecating. You did a far better job than you may have been giving yourself credit for.
Not when I hosted with Bud, dude.
Here's the thing with Bud. Bud is, and I will tell him this hopefully in a future episode. I would say, to compare Bud Pollock, he is a legendary sports writer. He is like if you had to host with Tony Kornheiser or Dan Le Batard. And what I mean by that is
that's a great Kornheiser is probably like the best comparison right there.
Yes.
For sure.
And it's not so much like he is not an X's and O's guy. He is more of a storyline, human emotions. He is a different cat, and not in a bad way at all. He did sports for so long. The X and O's things don't get him excited. He wants to hear the story, the emotion, the care, like make him care, which is really hard for young broadcasters to do because they're so XO fantasy gambling and number person.
Right. And honestly, years later, I actually, looking back on that, I wish I could take what I know now and what I feel towards sports now and apply it to then. Because back then I was like, oh, people want to know breakdowns of games and play by play of Syracuse opponent. But like I like where he was at mindset wise of just like storylines more than just like I was saying earlier, like, oh, Celtics lost last night, this is what happened, but it's funny looking back on those moments because that was definitely like one of the worst moments of my life. Get me out of here.
Let's end it on a positive note, because hopefully people listening to this podcast get an opportunity or get a chance like we did. Two young guys in their 20s getting to do their dream job in their home market or getting to do something. Now, hopefully you go back and listen to episode 1 and listen to my advice, what Shane told me about INC or LLC or getting a platform to build and getting those reps. Look, there's a chance you're 18 or you're 28 and you're young to this. You're starting off, in a lot of the mistakes or the things we regret, you don't do because you have a new platform. Like podcasts weren't a thing back when we were doing this. People didn't get it. StreamYard and other sites, they weren't doing these types of things. So those two things. One, Josh, do you want to shout out your personal social media if people have questions, or do you want to say no? Look, I don't do this media thing anymore. Okay. You guys are okay. Yeah, give a shout out to people who have questions about you. And then
let me look at my Twitter handle because I honestly,
is it JP Murray still?
Yeah, I think it's JP Murray 15. Give me 1 second.
All right.
Sorry.
While
you could edit this.
No. Leave it, because guess what? While he's looking to plug his, I'll plug mine again at Tom Goz, TOMG is easy. Facebook, and make sure you search Getting There with Goz to download, subscribe, rate, and review. See, I know how to plug stuff now. I learned that. Didn't know how to do that.
This is the thing. You are very media trained. It's obvious. You can tell I've been out of the game for about 6-7 years. Yeah, my Twitter is JP Murray 15. So if anybody wants to, relive a moment on the first quarter that they liked or hated, or just wants to give us a shout out for whatever reason, go ahead.
And by the way, leading into this interview, when it's going to air, I shared some promo photos, which I've seen the comments. I already know the comments that are on the way for some of these. I did not have a beard in those. I look ridiculous in some of these photos I shared on Instagram and Twitter and everything else.
Of the first quarter?
Oh, yeah. When Kim Teska took shots of me, I look like...
Love it.
I just read the comments there. One last question for you. You mentioned you were retired from radio.
Yeah.
Is a first quarter reunion in the future? Can I get you back on at least for a guest? If people respond positive to this episode in stories, I know our jailhouse basketball people might want it. We got some mutual friends. Shout out to our buddy Darren and others and Luke and everybody. Would you be up to at least do a few episodes of me talking sports in the future?
I would be open to that as long as we have no Day themed thing throughout any of the shows. If you can promise me that, I think I could agree. I think I could sign on the dotted line.
Well, it's the day after Valentine's Day, so you'd have to wait a full year. So you're in perfect spot to have that happen. All right, cool.
So I waited. That's why I wanted. I waited. I planned this out, bro.
So there we go. All right, so we might hear Josh Murray in the first quarter. It was dead for about 6 years, but like that Undertaker gift.
Yeah, we got to get
out of the casket. Awesome,
we have mutual love, like for different things, sports, 90s WWE. I don't know, garlic, Buffalo Wild Wings, garlic Parmesan wings.
Yes.
the list goes on. So,
my God, that's Josh Murray in the first quarter.
I wanted you talk about Adam Shawn as your inspiration. Jim Ross, are you kidding me? The late '90s, early 2000s, Jim Ross. Like that's what I try to bring a little bit of humor, and a little bit of realness to the broadcast.
You know what? I said that was the last question. Are you ticked off finding out about all the stuff I took from our show to Albany? Even that by God thing, people know in Albany that when a certain person's like, we would hit the music. I would do the Jim Ross thing. People don't realize like that started on our show. Like we would play the Stone Cold stuff all the time on the first quarter.
I'm not that mad because it's your, like, it's not like I thought of these ideas. They're all yours, bro. Do whatever you want with them.
We were a team. The self-deprecating Josh Murray is always. We will have you back. I'm thinking about NBA time, like probably like a Friday episode because you're a big NBA guy. You're a huge Laker fan.
Uh-huh.
I'll probably have you back around like the NBA playoffs, and we'll get to talk about some sports then. All right, my friend.
Let's do it. Love talking with you.
This was when I launched this podcast. One of the number one things on my list I wanted to do was to reunite with you after 6 years. Thank you so much for doing this, and I'm so happy to say we will be talking again soon.
All right, man. Take care.